Hi everyone, welcome to this presentation, the first in our third unit on empires. This time we'll be talking about Athens and Sparta, comparing the two Greek city-states in terms of what life was like in each of them. And what you'll notice is that there are some similarities, but for the most part, these were two very different societies. And it's why within the note sheet, I want you to be able to fill in that table comparing and contrasting different elements within society. So as you listen and watch this presentation, be sure that you are filling in your notes based on the categories there. So, the city-state or polis, um, the development of Greek civilization. So we're looking at around 750 to 350 BC. So what we see here is before they had individual city-states, we're looking at them called um, Hellenis. We're looking at just a collective group of these city-states here. Um, they're born on this peninsula that you can see right here on the map, and it was divided up by geographically just mountains and valleys, and so that's how they were able to divide up the territory into these different city-states. And so the civilization in this area of Greece consisted of hundreds of different independent polis, these city-states. So you can see Athens, Delphi, Corinth, Olympia, Sparta, all in this area here, again divided up by mountains and valleys. So let's talk about the unity and disunity. So the things that they shared were a common language. They worshipped the same gods. They had Olympic Games every 4 years, starting in 776 BC. And so what you can see here is this is obviously something that we do, still today, thousands of years later. And so these Olympic Games really started back during this time frame. Now, was this enough to constitute a unified Greek identity? That's an important question to be considering. Is that was it enough, or were these elements enough? Some say yes, some say no, but we'll discover that as we go through the presentation. Things they didn't share were a fierce rivalry for each other, and there was constant warfare between these groups for competing resources or strength and power, things like that. And they had various systems of law and government, which was probably a big reason why they weren't able to stay so unified. However, was it enough to tear apart the entire civilization? So these two questions are important questions to be thinking about as you understand how similar and different these two groups were. Let's start with Athens. So the history, they went from a monarchy to a democracy. So early on, they were monarchy, so a king and queen, king or queen, I should say, but in this case, obviously, it was a king. In 682, we see a group of aristocrats or sort of the higher wealthy individuals taking control. What was the results? People revolted. They didn't like it. In 621, Draco was chosen to bring order. So, what is if you've ever heard the word draconian? It typically means someone who rules ruthlessly, or has like a ruthless rule or a law in place. And so, about 60 years later, we see Draco was chosen to bring order, and he did it pretty significantly as a means of making it happen. In 594, Solon was chosen to reform the government in two major policies, slavery and debt policy, where if you are in debt, you can't sell slaves to get out of your debt, and then a policy towards the aristocracy, these wealthier individuals in society, they could no longer dominate. And it set this early precedent for the first democracy, for people who wanted to be able to have a say within government. And so you can see early on, we see monarchy, we see people taking control, and then later on with Solon, they were able to start to see elements of a democracy. In 508, Cleisthenes created the world's first democracy, where freedom of speech and equality before the law were made very important, and land ownership, participation in assembly, etc. were important elements. Education and values. Boys were tutored until 7, and neighborhood schools until they were 14. Even some years for the poor children, which was again part of that equality piece. They had a lot of physical education, including military preparation. That was big in Athens. They read books, they learned musical instruments, and they were very much well-rounded individuals. They did things that they valued and very good physically fit children. They went briefly to military academy, and then they were able to live their lives as they wanted to. So military preparation was important, but not a major element throughout the entirety of their life. With girls, not much education, really only domestic skills in the household to help provide for the family. Men and women, The irony for women between 750 and 350 was that they had role in government or public life, and roles in legal matters. But then, as they started moving towards democracy, women had less and less of a role. So it's very interesting how society shifted in that way. The philosophical rationale, and you can read this down here, of Aristotle, and what he meant by women is the infertile man. Essentially, just saying that men were better than women, and they didn't have a place in significant roles in society. They were married into their teens to men who were 10 years older than them, and they were usually forced to stay inside, again, not having a prominent role within society. There were some military innovations. Athens had a very big naval dominance, as you saw on that map at the beginning. They're surrounded by water in this peninsula, so to have a strong navy was really important for some of these city-states, including so for Athens. And so they created this ship that you see here, this galley ship that was propelled by 170 rowers who would sit in there and move the ship. It was fast, maneuverable, it was sturdy, had a battering ram. So it was this trireme here that you see that was particularly of good use and strength for the naval dominance of Athens. All right, so if you make sure you take some time to fill in those notes there for Athens. Now let's move on to Sparta. Their history was a little bit different from Athens. They had a big hunger problem happening in Sparta, and so their idea was to conquer through conquest and helots. Um, and so, what is to be understood is that these different helots, these military individuals, helped to shape this military culture within their society. That the military became the dominating piece. Is how you gain power was through violence and through your military. And so, for Sparta, building an elite army that even other places were using was really key for Sparta. Their education and values were all the boys left home at 7 for military and training school. From 7 to 18, they had harsh discipline, learning to take pride in pain, military skills, coming of age tests, really preparation for fighting. And that's a stark contrast to what we saw within Athens. They had very tight military service, marriage laws, things like that were put in place to ensure that military was first. Even girls were able to do a lot of these physical education pieces, a lot more independence than they did in Athens. Why? Because they wanted to make sure women were also prepared on the very big off chance that they were going to have to um, fight for whatever reason. No great literature came out of Sparta, but again, there were a lot of great soldiers that were fought in many different battles as a result of Sparta. Men and women in society. Mothers would tell that this is a famous, sort of mantra within society: come back with your shield or on it. So you either came back victorious or you died trying. Um, Very small group of men had political power. Women's real main job, while they had independence, was to reproduce, um, was to create, sort of repopulate the society with new children every time that they would go to battle and lose them. So women were designed to be strong and reproduce and have that role within society. They married men their own age. They had increased authority at home during wartime since the fathers were gone. Patriarchy, but it was a lighter patriarchy within society. Military innovations, brutality, efficiency, fierceness. Um, they had these new inventions here with military bronze armor, shield, sword, foot spears, a lot of these new innovative things that a lot of people had not seen before. It made battles really quick, bloody, efficient, and most importantly, victorious for the Spartans. So they had a very big military push, especially in the army. Athens had a very strong navy, and as you can imagine, though, they are going to butt heads, and you will see that happening within wars coming up. And so the question becomes: is a Greek Empire in the works? And maybe we'll learn about that over the coming days. So make sure you're filling in your notes. Fill out the interactive guide if you have any questions, and I will see all of you next time. Thanks for watching.